Hi guys, thanks so much for clicking on this video and welcome back to my channel. So today I wanted to talk about the medical school application process since I know a lot of you are probably applying to medical school right now and it's a little bit complicated. There's so much I did not know before I put in my application. So I just wanted to share my tips, my advice, and an explanation of the process and the things that you absolutely need to know before you apply. I just want to say quickly that this is actually about putting in your application and the process of applying rather than tips for having a strong application. But if you guys would like, I can definitely make a video about that as well. So without further ado, let's hop right in. So the primary application generally becomes available on AMCAS in early May. So this year it's May 4th. And it does not become available to submit until late May, early June. So this year that is May 28th. And what I would suggest doing in that time is filling out your application, making an account, and making sure that you have your application 100% ready before it is the date to submit on May 28th. Now, the reason why I think this is so important, and a lot of you might not know this, but it is definitely essential to get your application in as early as possible. I want to address why that's so important, but first I want to answer a question that some of you might have, which is, why can't I just wait till the day before I apply and I can go on May 27th, make my account, put in my family application, copy and paste my personal statement, and then I'm good to go the day of? Well, one thing that I did not realize, and I think a lot of people don't realize, is that the application actually has a lot of tedious parts to it. So for one, the coursework section. You have to go through and fill out every course you took with all the details such as the grades, the credits it was worth, the classification of that course, and you have to do this for every single class that you've ever taken, all the transcripts that you are submitting. So it's super important to make sure that you do a good job and that you make sure that it matches your transcripts perfectly, as your application might not be verified if you don't do this. So definitely make sure to do your part in double checking your work. I remember I had my mom who was like helping me go through it, and she would like read my transcript and then I would say something back to her, and like we would just go through each class exactly. But it's definitely important to make sure you do a good job with this. In addition, you also have the work and activity section, and for that you want to put in a short description of every work and activity that is part of your application, along with all the other details about that. So there's a lot of tedious parts of the application process, and you want to make sure that you have everything put together, all your work is proofread, it's double checked, and you don't have any mistakes that could end up causing problems after you submit it. Another thing that's so important is making sure that your personal statement is perfect. I know a lot of people just copy and paste their personal statement into their application, which I would also recommend doing, but you want to make sure that's 100% proofread, since after you submit it, you can't change anything. And then you also want to make sure that all your transcripts are sent to AMCAS. So this could actually be really easy if your school does electronic transcripts. It could be something that's just like a quick and easy process. But a lot of schools actually have different processes, and some of them don't have electronic transcripts. So that could be through mail, and it could take a few weeks, and you never really know. So you want to make sure that you get your transcript sent as early as possible. So that's definitely something I would highly suggest working on at the beginning of the month in May. So another important aspect to this is that you want to make sure that you are putting in your application the day it becomes available to submit. The reason why this is so important is that early applications tend to do better than late applications. And this really depends on the school. Different schools have different policies on how they go about this. But I would just take it as a general rule for your own benefit to make sure that everything you submit is as early as possible. Now, the reason for this is that let's say you submit your application as early as possible, and then you are in the first batch of secondaries to be received. You get your secondaries, you do your secondaries as quickly as possible, and then you submit those early as well. Now you're in the first batch of applications to be reviewed by the admissions committee. And that can be really useful, as that can allow you to potentially be one of the first interviewees and to just be ahead of the game with the application process. The schools have limited number of interviews that they can conduct, and they have so many applicants. So it's definitely important to make sure that you can get as early an interview as possible. And then with that, hopefully acceptances that would be definitely better if you can get them early, obviously, because there are only a certain number of spots, and you want to make sure that you are, applying when all the spots are open at that given time. So another reason why it's really important to make sure that your application is submitted as soon as possible is that your application actually needs to be verified by AMCAS before it can be sent to schools. So let's say you submit May 28th. It could take a few weeks for your application to be verified. And essentially what they're doing when they are verifying your application is they are going through all your transcripts and all your information and making sure that everything matches and it's correct. So that's why it's super important to make sure that all your courses are put in correctly, that you double check and proofread all of your work to make sure that it's 100% accurate. So let's say that you do that and it's perfect, then you're good to go. However, if you are not approved and your application is not verified, then you will have to actually resubmit. And so the tricky thing about this is, verification could take a few days to up to 6 weeks. So, in the best case scenario, you submit your application, you're verified. I think I was verified in like 2 weeks, so it wasn't too bad. I got verified and then I was good to go. And then the applications weren't actually sent to schools until late June. I can't remember the exact date, but it's sometime around late June. So it's not, exactly when your application is verified and then it will just be automatically sent. So I had that time in between verification and my application being sent to schools. However, let's say your application does not get verified. Let's say there's some mistake. Well, you have to go back and make those changes. Then you have to resubmit your application, and that next verification process could take weeks, and that could end up putting you back in the application process, which could ultimately end up hurting your application. So you definitely want to make sure that you are submitting the very first day on May 28th. If, let's say, that were to happen and your application was not verified, it's just super important as well to make sure that you proofread all of the information possible and that everything is perfect so you don't have to deal with that. Another thing that I want to mention is the MCAT. So if you have your MCAT score, it will automatically show up on your AMCAS application. However, if you don't have it yet, and let's say you are planning to take the MCAT or you've already taken it, you just haven't gotten your score back, then you can put in the test date into the AMCAS application, and when you submit it and your score becomes available, it will just automatically upload and be sent to the schools that you're applying to. You don't have to worry about sending your score to schools or doing any sort of extra work with that, which is really useful. I do want to talk about what happens if you do not have your MCAT score back. So in my case, my MCAT date was May 31st, and I did not receive my score back until July 2nd. So essentially, I had that time and I did not have my MCAT score back. Well, you can still submit your primary application, but I think there's something that's really useful, and this is my personal advice. I put in my application the first day it became available. I took my MCAT, and when I put in my application, I only applied to one school that I was applying to. So the reason why I didn't want to apply to all 25 schools I was applying to in that first submission was that, let's say that I got my MCAT score back on July 2nd and I did so badly that I wanted to apply next cycle. Okay, so I was planning on retaking the MCAT, fixing my application up a little bit, and then I was going to apply a year from then. The problem with that is then I would have spent money on 20, 25 schools that I was applying to, and each application for the primary application process cost $40. What I mean by that is it is one application, but you get to add schools, and each school costs $40 to apply. So, I would have spent hundreds of dollars, and in addition to that, there would have been issues with my application in applying to all those schools more than once. And this is something that I know people talk about a lot, and I definitely don't know exactly why this is or what goes through the admissions committee's minds when they are making these decisions. But it is generally advised that you don't apply to the same school more than once. Obviously, there are cases where people do this and they get in and it's fine, but it's generally best to not apply to the same schools more than once, and that's what's advised. So just to avoid that, I just decided to apply to that one school, and then on July 2nd, I already had my application verified. So I didn't have to wait another few weeks for it to get verified all over again. It was totally fine, and I was able to just add the schools I wanted to add to my application, submit it right away, and then I was 100% good to go, and the applications were sent to the schools right away, and there was nothing else to worry about. So after you put in your primary application, you're going to start receiving secondaries. Now, some schools have a screening process, and they will actually look through the applications in some way to make sure who they're sending the secondaries to. But most schools at this point, I believe, will actually just send their secondaries to every applicant that applies. So the primary application is what goes to each school you apply to, and it's kind of just an overview of you, and then the secondary applications are very specific to that school. However, you do have the time between June and July. Let's say you submit May 28th, you're good to go, and then you start receiving your secondaries in July. You have that time to draft up your secondary. So you might be thinking, how do I do that? I haven't received the secondaries yet, so how do I know what the questions are? Well, the good thing is a lot of those questions are used year after year by the same schools. So a lot of schools will use the same questions that they've used over the years. And then in addition to that, there are a lot of schools that will use very similar questions. And maybe the length requirements will be different. Maybe the question will be worded in a slightly different way. But it's very possible for you to start drafting up some sample secondaries and go on Google and just search up, this school previous secondary application, maybe from the past year, or look at sample very common secondary questions and then just start drafting. You might be thinking, I can't believe I have to do more work during this time. I just finished a whole primary application, and you may have just finished school or the MCAT and you just need to relax. I'm not saying you have to do this the day that you submit your primary application, but I just think it would have helped me so much if I had just taken the time to go through and just find some sample ones that are super popular and just started drafting them, because you want to make sure, as I said earlier, that you are ahead of the game and you have everything together. And so once you start getting those secondaries sent to you, you already have drafts for them. You can just start adding them, tweaking them and editing a little bit, but you already have samples and drafts written up, and then you can just go through and submit as early as possible. Because once you get your primaries and your secondaries in as early as you can, it's so important to make sure that you are early and that, the admissions committees are seeing your applications in the first few batches. So I would just suggest doing that. I know you might be exhausted at that point. Definitely relax, take a break, but you probably might have some time during that period. And I would just say, take that and make sure to use it wisely and just save yourself the stress when the secondaries come rolling in, because they won't all come in at once exactly, but I would get a few at like one time, and it would be so stressful to think, like I have all these secondaries, I have to go through them all. Now, the last thing I just want to quickly mention, and I'm not going to get into too much detail about this, but I'm definitely open to making another video if people would like me to, is that you want to be aware of the CASPer test. Now, the CASPer test is a separate reasoning exam. You take it at home, it's online. I think it's only like an hour. It's not too long. Maybe it's an hour and a half. I can't totally remember, but you just take it, and it's not based on anything that you memorize. It's purely based on reasoning. I think typically a lot of students will take this in June, and you do have to prepare for it. It's not something that you might sit down and study for like the MCAT, but there are definitely ways that you can prepare and study to make sure that you do well. And the last thing I want to say is I would just highly suggest doing that. They do say it's not something that you prepare for, but personally, I don't believe that. I definitely think you should prepare. Don't listen to that advice. Make sure that you know the types of answers that the test will want, and that you're as prepared as possible. And just, keep this on your mind. The CASPer test is not required by all schools. It's only required by some of them. But there's a good chance you could be applying to some of the schools that the CASPer test is required by, since more and more schools are requiring it now. So just make sure that you're aware of that and keep that in your mind as you are going through the process. So that's it for me, guys. I hope you guys liked this and it was helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know. And don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and yeah, keep letting me know what videos you guys would like. I'm always here to make more for you, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye, guys.